Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
A different take on today's Your Take. Something a little bit different on this episode. I talked to a former police investigator who shares with us his journey and his 34 years served in the police force. Hope you enjoy this episode, and don't forget to see our many other interviews on our channel. All you need to do is hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Thanks for all your support. Today I'm joined by a former police investigator who served 34 years, mostly working in the Criminal Investigation Department. His work as a senior investigating officer saw him managing high-profile and challenging investigations. The Glasgow Airport Terrorist investigation, the murder of Polish student Angelika Kluk, whilst also establishing Operation Anagram to investigate serial killer Peter Tobin's links to other unsolved crimes. Since his retirement, my guest has set up his own independent and confidential consultancy for victims' families with a multilingual expert team. He's been involved in innovative use of television, online and social media regarding serious crime investigations. He has appeared on BBC's Crime Watch, guested on many podcasts, been a regular contributor and speaker at live crime discussions, and is a figurehead and advisor on crime television documentaries. Today I talk to David Swindle. We look at David's early life, why he chose to join the police, his 34-year career in the police service, famous investigations he has worked on, and I try to discover what motivates a person to commit a heinous crime. A very warm welcome, David. Thanks for joining me today for Your Take.
Thanks for that introduction. I couldn't have said it better myself. The only bit, as you said, when I retired from the police, I left the police. I like to say I left. I hate the word retired because it sounds like I'm going to be doing nothing. And certainly since I left the police in June 2011, I've been doing a lot. And you gave a nice sort of introduction there about all the things, about an overview of my police career and what I'm doing just now. So I'm delighted that you've sought me out and we're having this chat.
David, there's a lot to discuss, and we're obviously going to speak in some detail about your time as a police investigator. But before we speak about all these things and delve a little bit deeper into your story and experiences, can we start off with your early life? Can we go back to the very start, the foundations? Can we begin by you telling us when and where you were born, and what are your recollections from childhood, and what sort of things interested and stimulated you as a young boy?
Yeah, well, I won't tell you exactly when I was born. I'll leave that to the mathematics of the people that come to the Makings of a Murderer tour that I'm doing UK-wise just now. 34 years in the police, 11 years doing after that. So I won't say the exact date I was born. Suffice to say I was born in Ayrshire, the west coast of Scotland. I went to school. It was called Stevenson High School. And I was academically gifted. I was intelligent. I left the school when I was 16, and I became a science technician. And that was the way that I furthered my education. And I left the school with qualifications, and I went into employment, and I took, which I suppose nowadays is called like a modern apprenticeship. So I was a trainee science technician. I always had that thirst for analysis and research. Like as a kid, at Christmas time, people would get toys and other things. I would get a chemistry set and things like that for my Christmas. So I always had an analytical mind. So very quickly as a science technician, a science technician in the school, I got the qualifications and advanced. And when I was 21, I was a senior science technician, 21. That was me. It was that phrase, dead men's shoes, and I was going nowhere. So I decided, analytical mind, science background, different things, and I wanted a challenge. I applied for the police. I joined the police on the 21st, I remember it clearly, the 21st of March, 1977, the Queen's Jubilee year. And I was a uniform officer, went to training, and I started in a place called Paisley, and that was where I was a uniform officer. And then I started to progress through the ranks.
You've spoken about you being a natural academic, and you've spoken about loving science and being a technician, and we've kind of got to the starting point of your policing career and where you were stationed. Can you just share with us some of your early experiences in policing and some of the roles you worked in initially during those sort of early years in the police service?
Yes, I started as all police officers now. They have a direct entry to the CID, direct entry to specialist departments. But I started as a police constable, and I started on the beat, went to the training, which was a police college, Tully Allen, Hendon in England. I went to the college, trained, and was walking the beat, patrolling the streets, dealing with disorder, dealing with all sorts of issues. And I loved it. I loved the challenge. Little did I know when I was a young uniform officer that I would become the senior officer that I eventually became, dealing with the challenges and sitting doing interviews like this. For me, I joined it for a challenge, and I could never imagine what I would become in the police. And the thing too, I kind of relate a lot to this, that just now when I'm speaking to these venues, big venues throughout the UK with the makings of a murderer, people come to me at the end that are thinking about joining the police or that are in the police, and they'll say, that was refreshing to hear what you said. I'm definitely joining the police, or I'm going to stay in the police. I've been a bit disillusioned recently, but listening to me speaking, it's motivating them. So I look back to myself as a young officer. You're easily influenced by things. There's good days and there's bad days in the police, like any job. And now I look at what I'm doing, speaking, and people come to me and saying the same things as I felt as a youngster, saying, will I last this job? It's the best job ever. And that's the big thing I say about being a police officer. It's the most varied career. And for me, it was the best job I ever actually embarked on.
For you, the best job you could have ever done, a nice sentiment. And obviously we'll talk about your career progression, but I want to stick on the early years of policing and specifically tap into kind of the psychology of that. And how do you think it shapes you as a young person coming into contact with people of all walks of life, different experiences, working in different scenarios? How do you think it kind of shapes you as a young man? Did it change your perspective in life in any way?
Well, I joined the police when I was 22. Now, a lot of people join very young. It used to be like the police cadet system, and they joined at 16 and right through. I had actually, although then it doesn't sound like a lot, I had a career, I had been working, I had a perspective in life. But yeah, definitely the police and what you see does change you, your attitude to things. You look at other things, you become suspicious of things. But it's something that you see things in the police that never leave you. Dealing with dead people, dealing with victims, trying to tell victims, families what happened, why their loved one was killed. There's things that you deal with in the police that no one will ever deal with on a day-to-day basis. But the big thing I always say is it doesn't, you become to a certain extent insular, but it doesn't harden you to the horrors of life, because police officers are human, and you should always, you see another human being. And one thing I say is, the Robert Burns, the poet thing, man's inhumanity to man. Why does someone kill another human being? And for all the times I was in the police, I have never been able to understand that. Now, I was a beat officer working in Paisley, dealing with fights, dealing with domestic abuse, drunk incidents, attending these disorders. And then I progressed into the CID fairly quickly, just over 3 years in the police. I got my first time around what was called your sergeant's exam. And then after I passed my inspector's exam. So I was moving, and I was identified as an individual that would progress. And I went into the CID quickly. And in the CID, young officer, young detective, 3.5 years in the police, you saw things that you could never believe. Now, I'm talking in the 70s. I joined in 77, and I was a young detective in the very early 80s. And you look at TV programs like Life on Mars, Gene Hunt, DCI Gene Hunt, and on that, they're in the 70s or 80s, and a DI from the future, from the modern days, goes back to then. Now, I think back to these days now and think, I was in the Gene Hunt and the Sweeney era. So I saw the police when they didn't have DNA, they didn't have technology. And then when I left the police in 2011, it was a modern policing. So I saw all the changes and I lived through it all. And that's one thing that probably has made me better for what I do now. I understand what it was like then, and the police trying to do their best without the technology they have, and the modern side of it. So the police has changed dramatically over the years, but the concept was always the same. The old thing they used to say when you joined the police, uniform officer, to guard, watch and patrol. And that's what it was. That was the principles. And also to catch the criminal, to catch the bad person that has committed the crime. And it's never changed over the years.
We'll talk about some of those major technical advancements in policing later on in the interview.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I want to talk now about your progress within the police service and how you went on to serve in the criminal investigation department. Can you recall your initial feelings making that progression, and what attracted you to particularly working in that particular field?
Yes, they have a training program where you can apply for what is like a temporary detective constable, an acting detective constable. So I had, my first examinations, the sergeant's examinations, and I applied to see if I would like it, part of the training program, detective constable. But I always had an analytical mind because of what I did, chemistry set as a youngster, science technician, looking at things logically, and I always wanted a challenge. So that was why I applied for the CID, to join, to get in there, to make something better, to make a change. And when I think about over the years, I certainly did. But for me, joining the CID as a young officer was a pinnacle. That was a staging for me. And the rest of my career was out and in, at different ranks from the CID, like 9 months as a uniform sergeant, 1 year as a uniform inspector. But the bulk of my 34 years in the police was in the CID.
We'll try later on and summarize these 34 years.
You'll never summarize these 34 years. Never summarize the things that you see in the police and the things that you do in the police, the challenges you face, the challenges working long hours, the dealing with victims families. You can never put that over in a 10-episode program. And it's been tried in so many dramas, so many programs, and there's a lot of reality in some of the programs, TV programs, but you could never summarize what we do or what I did, even just one person did in the police. But we can try today. Yeah.
David, you've gone on to work on many high-profile investigations, some of which we'll talk about later on. But how do you get inside the mind of a murderer, and do you need to adopt a journalistic or psychological approach and examine the killer's background, their life history, previous convictions, and other specific details that help solve the crime?
Well, that's an interesting question, because the UK tour that I'm doing just now is called The Makings of a Murderer, and it's looking more like serial killers and why they do it, and it's power, control, and they're clever. There's a lot of aspects on it. When you actually are dealing with an investigation, you look at so many aspects. You look at the motive, you look at the why. That's always, but sometimes there's not always an evident motive as to why someone has been killed. So there is a challenge. There's so many different types of murders. There's so many different types of murders. There's the murders that happen in the street where there's alcohol involved. There's the murders that happen in the house, the domestic abuse, where there's no, where there's like coercive control. A victim is frightened to speak up. There's other members of the family speak up, and there's far too many of these two murders. There's far too many murders anyway. And then you go into other complex ones, which are the ones like the organised criminals. The organised criminals where it's to do with drugs, it's finance. And then you go on to the sexually motivated crimes, and that makes up a lot of the bigger cases, like the serial killer ones, which I ultimately dealt with. But in your whole career, most officers don't deal with a serial killer. It's very seldom that happens. But there's so many motives, so many potential motives, so many types of killers. But the one thing, as a police officer and a detective, you should never forget that you're dealing with a victim, and that victim is someone's daughter, someone's son. And really, it shouldn't matter why they were killed. It's to try and find out and to get to that. But killers will cover their tracks. They'll cover up crime scenes. They'll tell lies. They'll create alibis. The police get better, and sadly, the criminals get better over the years as well.
I know you've dealt with so many cases, and one thing we don't want to do is generalize, which sometimes we tend to do. But from your experiences in looking into, for example, killers' backgrounds, I know circumstances vary. In most cases, do these people come from deprived backgrounds, and have they not had a strong family bond, or had difficulties in their early life? Is that normally the case, or is that too much of a generalization?
There's a big generalization. This is the nature nurture thing. Now it's very easy. There's hundreds of thousands of people come from deprived backgrounds, but they don't all go on to become killers. So it's very easy to generalize and say that was because they came from a poor background. There's too many other factors involved. Yeah, there could be early life experiences that influenced them to do something or whatever. But for me, as a CID officer that dealt with literally hundreds of murder investigations, it's very difficult to try and give mitigation for why someone is killed, and to say why someone's killed. And there's the other part too. Are killers born evil? Are killers born evil? Some, yes, but usually there's a progression with some factor that happened in their life. But a lot of times a murder is something that's happened, like a violent attack. Or someone just has too much alcohol and they argue, aggressiveness, things like that. And then there's the cunning, the conniving, the ones I speak about on my UK tour, The Makings of a Murderer, the controlling individuals. This is how they get their motivation, by murdering someone with a sexual element to it. So there's quite a lot. It's a very complex area, and I'm not a psychologist. You know, I was a senior police officer, and what we do in the police, you know, laterally when I was in the police and now serving officers, well, you use psychologists, you use profilers, you use geographical profile, you use all the experts that are available to try and look at, to detect a criminal, and also to try and work out if they've done something else. It isn't, I, as a police officer, and this sounds maybe quite crass for an officer, but it wasn't my job to find out why someone, you know, to try and understand why they did it. And it's not the police officer's job to convict them. You detect the person, you identify the person's done it, and it's up to the court. It's up to the court and the jury to decide what the sentence is. And that too often was some of the things that have happened where the police decide, we'll find out, it's up to us. We're going to be, you get the police officer that's the investigator, the prosecutor, the judge and the jury. You know, that's the old school thing. No. And it's up to the court to decide what happens. Frustrating as it may be sometimes when someone gets off and you think they've done it, but that's not the police officer's job. So it's a very complex area, the nature nurture thing, lots of issues there. But you know, we should always remember it's about the victim. Sometimes there's too many true crime programs, too much focus on the criminal, on the murderer. We should always remember the victims' names and the victims' faces.
We touched upon earlier on about advancements and scientific changes that you've witnessed during your career and have greatly assisted police investigations. But can you talk about your own role in implementing change and developing innovative national crime investigation processes? Yes,
I mean, as a scientist, that was my background when I was young. You know, the whole fascination with how it's developed over the years with DNA. You know, when I think back in the late 70s and 80s when I was working in rapes and murders, and I think what it would have been like if we had DNA then. You know, the cases that could have been solved. But as I moved on in the police, I was involved in quite a lot of things, and one in particular was life timelining, looking at Peter Tobin that killed a young woman in a church in Glasgow, Angelika Kluk, the Polish student. And I looked at the timeline, looked at his life to see what else he'd done. So I created a thing I called it Investigator, looking at his life, investigative analysis of a serial killer. And we looked at his whole life. And that was something that, believe it or not, hadn't been done like that before. But another thing I was involved in Scotland was the implementation of MAPA, which is the Multi-Agency Public Protection Arrangements. And that is where authorities, the police, the social services, the health board, the prison, the housing, they all work together to introduce a plan round about a dangerous offender. It had been in England, but it wasn't in Scotland. So I was involved in bringing about changes about public protection. So that was something else I did. So as you go on in the police, as you're involved in different things, you work in different types of things, reviewing cold cases, things like that. So as well as an investigator, I was involved in bringing in quite a bit of change as regards public protection and looking at serial killers' lives.
David, you worked on hundreds of prolific investigations, and we can name some of them. The Glasgow Airport Terrorist attack. You've just mentioned the murder of Polish student Angelika Kluk, and forming Operation Anagram to investigate serial killer Peter Tobin. Of the hundreds of cases you've worked on, which for you stick in the mind the most, and for what reasons?
I think from a professional and personal, you know, life-defining time is the formation of Operation Anagram and the Angelika Kluk murder in the church. The whole horrors of what happened there. A young woman being killed in the church, her body been hidden under the floor. someone that's committed other crimes, identifying his other, where his victims were, a whole team of us working on that. And the airport terrorist attack, the fast moving part of that, the speed of how it moved on the day, sitting in the house here and then getting the phone call to come out and be involved in managing the Scottish aspect of it. So all these things are the high profile ones, but there's other ones. There's quite a lot of other cases that I worked on as a young detective sergeant, in the north side of Glasgow. Cases where, someone's stabbed, killed, and it's, there's no reporting, no media reporting, maybe one article in the newspaper, and that's it. Young victim killed, one I had in Ayrshire, not far from where I am, and it was a young girl whose head was cut off, and we get a call in an afternoon, a sunny afternoon, girl in the garden without a head, and we then go, couldn't find her head, and it turned out her boyfriend, her partner at the time, was delusional. He believed that she was doing all sorts of things, and he cut her head off with a bottle. And that sticks in my mind. That was when I was a DI, a detective inspector, a young detective inspector. So these things stick in your mind. There's cases like that that don't get the media coverage. So sometimes, and that's quite a lot of people ask that question at the tours as well. Why is it that certain cases attract media coverage and other ones don't? You can never. There's hundreds of murders in the UK each year, and it's only certain ones that attract media attention. And it's sad that families, they lose a loved one and there's no coverage of it, and it's forgotten about. It's another statistic. So for me, I remember all of the murders that I worked on. There's some more than others because of the horrors of it or the complexities of it. But the career profiling ones, the high profile ones, like the Tobin case, the airport terrorist attack, no one was killed in the airport terrorist attack. One of the culprits died, but there could have been hundreds, maybe thousands of people killed if that car had gone into the airport. So as a CID officer, I always, I think back in the cases, I reflect on them. But one of the big things I always think about is the victims themselves. I try not to think about the killer, but it's very difficult. You think, why did he or she do that? Why? But you always should remember the victims.
It's interesting, the victims has come up again, and I want to talk about the psychology part of things and the kind of human condition as well, because I imagine with policing, firstly, it's very hard to get this life balance between living a normal, maybe a family life, and your work. And I can imagine some police detectives almost become obsessional workaholics over their jobs, and in some cases maybe it becomes personal. Of the investigations you've worked on that you've not been able to solve to this day, which ones do you recall, and do these kind of frustrate you that you've not been managed to close the case and find the perpetrator of the crime?
The policing it's a passion. It's a vocation. You're dedicated to it. Some more than others. Some people join the police and they can't wait. They count the days out until they get their pension. Yeah. Others, and most police officers want to do the right thing. They want to catch the bad person. They want to help the victims. Some of them want to join the police for different reasons, to help old women walk across the street, things like that. But yes, there are cases, and I have had some cases that a couple of cases that haven't been solved or where the culprit has got off. But the good thing, and this is modern technology now, that there's cold case reviews. The UK continually look back, the review cases. So if someone is murdered and it's unsolved, that is subject to review. So one of the cases I worked on, it was a businessman in Glasgow. He was murdered at the side of his house. It was very complicated. It was unsolved. That has been reviewed about 10 times, maybe 8 to 10 times, applying new technology. And that's the reassurance for a CID officer that, okay, if you don't manage, if there's not enough evidence there and it's not solved, that perhaps with the advances in technology, changes in allegiances, friends, maybe people knew at the time, come forward with information. So that is now the real thing that changes, that there is cold cases, that everything that you do will be reviewed. And it's reassurance for victims, families as well. Some cases will never be solved. There's cases where the exhibits have been lost, evidence has been lost at the time, not preserved, because in the 70s, some of the really old cases in the 60s, people they didn't know there was DNA, they didn't keep exhibits, clothing, evidential material. But the reassurance is that there is a system, and it's a review system that is in place in the UK, where unresolved cases are subject to review and new information can come in at a later date. And there's been a lot of high profile cases where there's been detections decades later because of DNA and things like that.
I want to come back to the victims and the experience you have of dealing with them. And you say they're often the forgotten people in the narrative. Obviously, as a police investigator, you've seen some horrific and horrendous scenes, and you've mentioned some of those earlier on, particularly someone's head being cut off. But obviously, at the end of the day, there's this detachment. You're able to walk away from that. How do you think the victims are able to deal with their losses and go on with their lives? And how have you found that from sort of first-hand experience? How do they cope with that loss, that awful reality that's gone on in their lives?
They don't. That's it. I mean, unless it happens to yourself, you'll never understand what it's like to lose a loved one. To lose a loved one by natural causes, but to lose a loved one that has been killed by an individual. And that is the big thing, that, unless it happens to yourself. And stuff that I'm dealing with, currently, families that have lost loved ones abroad, that have been killed abroad, I'm liaising with the families direct. And only 2 days ago was 6 years since Kirsty Maxwell died in Benidorm. This is a young woman that died in very unusual circumstances in a flat in Benidorm. Her family are still grappling for answers. It was in Spain. There was evidence lost. There was different things like that. And then next week, 2 weeks' time, it will be 11 years since Craig Mallon, a Scottish guy, was murdered in Lloret de Mar in Spain. And this is another case that our Victims Abroad team are working on. And I'm liaising direct with these families, and the families live in hope that there'll be information coming forward. And that is the thing. They'll never understand. We'll never understand unless it happens to yourself. And the police have got trained, family liaison officers that deal with flows, family liaison officers, and they're very important in the investigating process. And they're experienced and trained officers that are dealing with the families of victims. But it's very, very difficult. They'll never. It's a life-changing for them, the memories when a birthday comes round, so many years that person was killed or whatever, visiting a grave. And in some cases, victims' bodies are not found. And there's quite a few times, nobody murders, where someone has killed people and buried them or concealed them and not given that information. One of the things that I mentioned in my Makings of a Murderer tour is the no body murders, where people have concealed bodies, they've murdered, and they get convicted. You don't need a body to get convicted of murder, but families need a body to be able to bury it. And the Moors murders, Keith Bennett is one of them. And there's another campaign, quite a high profile campaign in it, and I speak about this, and is Helen's Law. And this was a young woman that was killed, and an individual, Ian Sim, was convicted of it, and he didn't divulge where the body was, and he still never, and he got out, and he's now dead. But Helen's Law is a high profile campaign about simply no body, no parole. And that is quite a strong thing there. If the person is in prison, they know what they've done with the body. They don't reveal what it is. You don't get parole. So the victims, the campaign, the push for answers, the push for change. But unless it happens to yourself, you'll never understand. That's victims' families' campaign, the push for change. But unless it happens to someone, you'll never understand what it's like.
I'm going to slightly change direction and turn the clock back now some 12 years to 2011, when you decided to leave the police force.
Retire is the name, but leave the police as far as
retire.
Yes, aye, yeah.
Do you have any regrets about making that decision at the time? And after retirement, you established the David Swindle Solutions. What made you decide to do this? And can you tell us the aim and purpose of setting up that particular organization?
Yes, the police, police officers retire early because of the setup, because of the demands on them, because of the pension, because of everything else. A lot of police officers leave when they've got 30 years service. Some of them leave when they join at 18 and they retire at 48. It's too young. It's too young. I was a senior officer and I could stay on longer. I could stay on beyond that. And I stayed on longer to see out the Peter Tobin case, the Operation Anagram, to do as much as I could with that. And also to do with the changes, the public protection arrangements, the MAPA changes in Scotland. So I stayed on till 34 years and I left. That was me. I was gone. And the time was right for me to leave. But you want to continue doing and using your skills. It's transferable skills that you can use to help other people. So when I left, I decided to set up my own review company, independent reviews. And it's so that I could still be using my skills and help others. And that is what that does. So it's independent reviews, and then it actually was advice and media, some media dialogue, because I did a few things on media too. And I would take part in crime documentaries, but not as a talking head, because one of the things I do, a policy I made when I left the police, was that I don't go on TV speaking about live UK investigations. So if anyone's going to make a call to me and ask me to comment on this fast-moving live investigation in the UK, the answer is sorry, I don't do that, because the police are dealing with that. And there's so many talking head experts go in and criticise the police for what they're trying to do at that time. I don't do that. But I do on TV documentaries, crime documentaries about cases, because we should never forget what the killers do and what they've done to these victims. So there is a good product there in the crime channels and the true crime world as well. But the big thing to do is identified that families that are killed abroad, that lose a loved one that's maybe murdered or in unresolved circumstances, like the Kirsty Maxwell case, they don't get the help from the British government. The policy, the British government's policy, is we do not interfere or try to influence investigations in our country. Okay, that's fine. But the question I ask is, what if investigations into the death of a British citizen in another country are seriously flawed, as in the case of Kirsty Maxwell? What do you do? They don't. So families losing a loved one, they get consular support, but they don't get joined up support regarding lawyers' advice, regarding lawyers in our countries, translations, translating documents, things like that. So the team that I set up, ancillary to David Swindle Crime Solutions, is called Victims Abroad, and it's translators. So I have people that live in Spain that have got linguist capabilities and researchers. And what we do is try and help a family present their thoughts to the court, and it's victim focus. And that's it in a nutshell. It's more complicated than that. But what we are doing is providing a service and help to families that lose a loved one abroad regarding translation, understanding the systems in our country, and presenting their thoughts and their requests. Not going in saying, you should have done that, or saying, you may wish to help the families, you may wish to consider that. So it's the victim's voice. So I'm using my skills of what I developed in the police. It's about the victims. It's a search for the truth, no stone unturned. And that's what I'm doing. And I've been doing that now. Yeah, that's when you made that comment there. It's a few years now, since June 2011. And not without its challenges, because these are unresolved cases and you're dealing with systems in another country. And I've got, this is, your podcast is different from mine, but I have a podcast just called Swindle's Search for the Truth. And that is totally a different concept from the true crime. It's the families, it's the people who's lost a loved one. It's them speaking on that and making appeals. Because we have done TV documentaries for these families, and that's great, getting out there, getting the message out there, but they're edited, and understandably so, because it's a TV product. But the podcast is the families speaking about their cases. The last episode I did was all in Spanish. It was all in Spanish to reach the Spanish people, appealing for witnesses. Now, we're going to be doing more. That's kind of, I haven't been doing much with that for the last 4 months, but tomorrow, actually, I'm going to be putting some more stuff out there on it. So it's a different thing. It's using the media, using social media. It's what I did in the police with Operation Anagram, to a certain extent, a website, appealing for information. But now, with social media, we buy the domain for the victim, buy a domain for the victim that's killed. We run everything from a website, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, everything around about it, to reach witnesses. So that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing. One of the things I'm doing just now. That's the main thing I'm doing.
What you've said just leads on nicely to my next question, because your experiences and skills in the police force have created other opportunities. You've been a contributor on BBC's Crime Watch, commentary and advice for TV crime programs, multilingual language skills.
It's a big word, that. It's a strong word, yeah. Try having it as a domain when there's people are sending it. One of the girls is called Debbie at multilingualcrime.com. I should have chosen a shorter one, but yeah.
Multilingual language skills and public speaking. And of the opportunities policing has presented, which have you found the most fulfilling, and for what reasons?
I think all the stuff there you mentioned is what a good police officer has, and people that progress through the ranks as regards communication skills. So communication skills is something that you really grasp at, having to be faced, as a senior investigating officer in a big investigation, TV camera in your face, speaking on that. And I was in Crime Watch 5 times with the Tobin case, live. So you develop media skills, you develop communication skills. But the biggest thing is investigation. It never leaves you. Having that ability to research, and as I say, leave no stone unturned, continually question. And that's the thing, questioning, looking at things, researching. And this is advice to police officers as well, don't accept the obvious. That might be the situation, but question that. And that is the thing. So these are skills that they never leave you. And I call it transferable skills to a certain extent. I could have just left the police, retired happily, but I wanted to continue and I wanted to help people, and that's what we're doing with it. But there's so many things that you learn as a police officer, that you develop as a police officer, and these are the things that I am using in my day-to-day basis. I speak German. I'm okay in German a little bit, enough, bisschen. But the language side of it, we've got experts for that. The old Google Translator is fine for reading documents, but when it comes to understanding legal documents, we've got a team of people, and that's the ones that are on my victimsabroad.com website. The women that are on that, they're in Spain, they're in different languages, speak 4 or 5 languages, and they're researchers. So it's not all about me. I've got the ideas. As I used to say, as a senior officer in the police, I didn't have the monopoly on ideas. It was about the team and the experts around about you. And that's what I'm doing now. I've got a good team around about me that work away on cases in Spain just now and produce it and work closely with the families as well. So it's about developing a team around about you. Yeah.
The medium of television has been mentioned a few times, and the documentary form as well as podcasting. But I want to hear your perspective on why you think people are fixated with true crime, and why do you think there's so many television channels and documentaries being made on this particular subject alone?
And individuals doing UK tours at 120 venues throughout the UK with audiences like 2,000 people at the Glasgow venue, 1,300 in Liverpool. Yeah, I mean, I can't believe it as well. There's so many people. There's a natural fixation for crime, natural fixation for it. People are genuinely interested. But one of the things that you need to bear in mind is it should never be over glamorized. It should never be. And there's so many true crime podcasts out there as well. And sometimes a podcast can be an individual sitting there talking about a case, and the victims' families don't even know about it. So you need to be careful with some of that. But the question that you asked there is one that comes up all the time. Are there too many true crime programs? No. Provided they have the right balance. And that balance is that we remember what the killers have done and we remember the victims. But we should never forget about what these horrible killers have done. And we should never forget the victims. So for me, provided the balance is right, there's never too much. And I think also the growth of social media, YouTube, channels, Twitter, everyone's sharing groups, crime forums. There's one event I go to in London. It started in England 3 years ago called CrimeCon. And it's a big true crime event. It's the biggest, probably arguably the biggest in the UK. There's been thousands of people at it, and it's in June. There's people come from America, people go to that. It's unbelievable the amount of people getting interested in it. And police officers are there, police officers are contributing to it, experts are contributing to it. It's people have always, right back to the Victorian times, the so-called, sadly, the Whitechapel murders, which is labelled the Jack the Ripper murders. There's always been a fascination in it. It's just now there is more. And a lot of it's coming from America, a lot of that. But yeah, there's lots of interest in it, as long as the balance is right, for victims. But we should never forget them. We should never forget what these killers have done.
I wanted to ask you one final thing. We're coming to the end of the interview, and we wrap up with some light-hearted 13 questions at the end. Interestingly, I took my young children to a prison yesterday, which I found particularly fascinating. But I think, it doesn't matter what our background is. We all have a perception on crime and the way criminals should be treated and what should be done depending on the crime. But I wanted to hear your particular perspective. Do you believe in rehabilitation depending on the circumstance of the crime? And do you have a particular viewpoint on that? Criminals being rehabilitated and put back out into society, into what we deem as the kind of normal day-to-day life?
Well, yes, they can be rehabilitated, of course they can. But any potential risk that they pose in public needs to be managed, and that's what the public protection thing's around. when criminals get out, if they're highly dangerous, there should be a risk management plan around them. So yeah, there's always, but there's other criminals, your serial killers, your people like Tobin, who's now dead, you know, that will never be rehabilitated, that are a real high risk of harm, a real danger to the public. So there's quite a few there that will never come out. But yeah, of course, over the years, people will change. People will have rehabilitated. They made a mistake. They killed one person in a particular situation. And there is rehabilitation. But there's others that will never be rehabilitated.
David, I wanted to come away and steer away from your career in policing and investigation, and
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me more. Come on. No.
ask you a more sort of light-hearted question.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask what your interests are and what you like to do to relax outside of your work, and are you working on any current projects, and do you have any future plans or aspirations?
Well, I think the garden is a big one today. It's a nice sunny day in May, which is unusual in Scotland. I think the decking needs painted, so I like the garden. But actively, yeah, I cycle. I ski. I'm a big skier. I ski in Austria twice a year. So I keep myself fit. I do a lot of stuff like that. You need to be able to switch off. And that's what I found in the police. You'll never switch off. You're always thinking. It's not like you like a builder. He does the job, he or she does the job, and it's finished. It might be someone is caught for a murder, but there's a trial to come. There's other things that happen. There's unresolved cases like the ones in Spain I'm working on. You know, you never stop, but you need to. And today, with technology, you've got a phone in your pocket, you've got your emails, you've got Twitter, you've got Instagram, you've got all these things, and that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing. But I can switch off. Once you go or switch off the computer, and I'll have a couple of hours painting the decking, and I might go out. It's a nice day for a cycle, and then tomorrow I'm doing something else to do with my own podcast. So I've got a balance. You know, you've got to have a work-life balance, and that's the thing. In the police, you're working long hours. One of the things I remember when I retired, left the police, someone said, when your telephone rings in the middle of the night, it's to do with a relative. It's not to tell you that there's someone been stabbed in the centre of Glasgow. And that is a big change to my life when I left the police. That if a phone rang in the middle of the night, I knew it was a family crisis. So yeah, you've got to try and get a balance.
It's really interesting because you say you've got this work-life balance now and you're able to switch off at any given time. But during your younger days and you were at the height of your career, did you find it difficult to switch off? And did it affect, say, your marriage, your relationship with your children, your relationship with your close friends? Was it really hard to kind of, you know, have that sort of balance around that kind of the infancy, you know, during the infancy of your career?
Throughout your career, it's very difficult to do that. You're working long hours. You're called out. I gave you an example. You're called out in the middle of the night, or you get the phone call, and you're making a decision there and then. Will I go out just now, or will I get the crime scene manager to control that scene, and I'll go in the morning when they're fresh, and then you go to sleep and you go, can't sleep. What's going on? What's happening? And that's coincidental. There's a siren in the background.
The other thing that I can imagine must be difficult is we tend to, when we meet up with our friends, we'll talk about our working day, and 9 times out of 10, that tends to be quite mundane. We might say we had a difficulty with a person in our job or whatever. In your case, it must be really difficult because you're not able to share that information because you're part of a criminal investigation. For legal reasons, you're not able to do so. That must be difficult as well, because you almost feel like maybe you're living a lie in some ways.
Well, yeah, that is totally understandable. People know knew what I worked at, they know what I'm working on just now. And when it's in the media spotlight, it's even more so. because they see you speaking on TV or something like that, or they see the media speculation. What's the situation with that? You learn to control that. And people, your friends and associates, they tend not to ask you that question, you know, and that's the thing. And that's one of the things that your personal life, you kind of control it, you kind of manage it. It's like any job. It's like, well, any professional job where you're dealing with privileged information or sensitive information. But no, I mean, you kind of, you need to have a coping mechanism when you see the things that happen. But a lot of people don't. And that happens, you get PTSD, you know, the military as well. People can't cope with it. And, you know, there's a better setup nowadays where there's counselling and things like that for PTSD. In the early days when I joined, there wasn't. The macho image, you just got on with it. You just got on with it. And that's the thing. And you need to find in your own mind, you know, you need to, you need to be able to chill or whatever. But just now, you know, likes of what I'm doing with the Makings of a Murderer tour, you go and you stand, one person, 2 hours in front of 2,000 people, and you finish, and you go back to your hotel room and you think, oh, what can I do now? And you can't sleep. You can't sleep because you're high. You're high on that, of doing that. And it's the same with dealing with a fast-moving investigation. Same with dealing with that. You're dealing with that. What have I got? Right, I'll need to do that. I need to think about that. You're on the go all the time. And that's the thing. But you learn to cope with it. Well, I did. A lot of people, sadly, didn't cope with it. And they had all sorts of crises in their lives. But PTSD is a big thing. Post-traumatic stress syndrome is a big thing. But there's more checks and balances now. Organisations within the workplace, they're more understandable about it. They've got better support around about it, and there's all sorts of counselling services for people that are dealing with traumatic instances. But some people still never declare that they have an issue.
David, before we wrap up this interview and we let you close off and go and paint your deck in, as you said, yeah, we'll just finish up with these quick questions. We ask all these guests quick fire questions to finish up the interview, to maybe establish things we don't know about them during the course of the last 60 minutes.
Good luck with this one. Yeah, good luck with this one. Let's see how you go on with this one then. I'm a trained interviewer. Come on, okay. Let's go.
David Swindle, number one, what would you say is your favourite pastime?
Skiing and cycling.
Skiing and cycling, you've mentioned before. We go on to cinema now. What would you say, David, is your favourite film and why?
Because I'm a fast-moving individual, my mind's operating. I don't always have the attention span to sit through a long movie, but there's nothing to beat the good old James Bond movies. The intrigue on them.
Any in particular favourite Bond or favourite 007 film?
I had a particular interest watching Spectre, because when I was skiing in a place called Solden in Austria, it was been filmed at that time. And Daniel Craig was staying in the hotel I was in. So where he goes into the glass cube at the top and he comes out, I was skiing in that area at that time. I was in that resort when all it's been filmed. So I got a real interest in Spectre, having been there when it's been filmed, and still going out there to skiing to where it was, because the Austrians have captured that commercial side of it. So, yeah.
Out of interest, did you see him or meet him? No,
I didn't see him. We saw plenty of people. Saw the plane, when the plane goes into the crashing. We saw all that, all the activity. But no, they told me, the hotel owner says he wasn't staying in the hotel. And then when they saw the film, the room that he was in and where some of it was filmed was one of the hotel rooms. So it was definitely in that nice hotel that we're in. So, but but the James Bond ones, it's a bit of fun. It's intrigue. It's fast moving.
From the silver screen now to books, but who would you cite, David, as your favourite novelist?
I tend, believe it or not, not to read books. I don't have the attention span to sit and read through a book. And it's something as well people have said I need to do, and I haven't done it yet. But I do contribute to some books. Some people come to me if they're writing, you know, a section about crime and they want advice on it, some authors, and I'll give them advice about how the police would speak, how they would dress, what they would do. But I tend not to read books, believe it or not. I read more stuff online, I read crime stuff, I research, I do things like that, but I tend not to sit and read books. Used to as a kid, but I don't now. Yeah,
I'm the same. I always find time's the issue.
I can't do more. Yeah.
If you could have chosen a different profession, what would it have been?
There's none, because I found I had been in a job. I was a scientist, and you know, if I'd still been in that, I probably still wouldn't be here today. It's probably such a boring job laterally, you know, because I was as far as I could go. But the police is such a varied career, varied profession. It was good to me. I was good to it. There's no career that I think that I would want to do, because it's and I'm reliving a lot of stuff just now. I'm doing media stuff. I'm presenting on stage, so I'm doing all these things. But the police for me was the best job you could ever get, and I always say it. There's a lot of bad publicity around it, but ups and downs like any career. But the best job you could ever have, for challenges and for being able to, so I hate the phrase, but give a little bit back.
Next, who would you say in life has been your greatest inspiration?
David Swindle. No, I don't know. I don't know. I haven't. It's something I never think about. I don't have a role model. I don't have anything like that. I like to see everybody different. I wouldn't like to say that person. I find that person such a strong individual that I'm influenced by them, and I don't. And that's the thing for me. Nah, I don't have any real people that I would feel inspired by, because you look at them and you say, well, what about that? What about that? And maybe that's the type of mind that I have as a researcher, investigator. So I'll say, what about that individual? They're a nice inspiration. No, they're not actually. They've done this, they've done that. So there's no one that inspires me.
The answer to that question did make me smile because it was so off the cuff. That was brilliant. We talk newspapers now. Do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
If I say any particular one, people will say that's because he's particular politics or whatever. I'm online all the time. I've got the saved parts. I've got Google alerts for things I'm working on, things that are reported on, things that I'm involved, other things involved. I read things that I need to read in newspapers, but I don't have any particular newspaper. I deal with them. Sometimes I avoid them. If the phone rings on a Friday afternoon and there's a number I don't recognise on my phone, it's the media looking for a quote about a particular case or something like that. I'm involved with the media to do with pushing cases, doing media interviews with it. I don't. All the newspapers, they all do a job, and that's what they're all there for. All the media, in particular with social media. I don't have any particular one that I favour.
What would you say now, David, is your favourite food?
Favourite food? I probably let's find that. I like any kind of food. I love fish. I think fish, I would say definitely. Having, brought up in a coastal area, coastal town, I just like fish. Different types of fish. Mackerel. Loving barbecuing mackerel. Catching mackerel, getting out in the boat, catching them, bringing them back and barbecuing them. So fish.
The next question stumps a lot of our guests. We asked them to choose their favourite cultural icon. It could be maybe a religious leader, someone who's changed history, a political figure. It could be somebody in policing. Who would you choose as a cultural icon?
I don't. It's like the newspaper thing. It's like the particular person that you aspire to or whatever. I don't have any. I don't like to say that particular person inspires me or that particular is my cultural icon, because every single one of these, there are negatives on it. And I don't have any on that at all. It's a good question, and it probably brings out a lot of people. But the type of job that I do, the role I'm in, I try to remain apolitical. I don't tweet anything that's going to show what my political thoughts are. I don't, and that's why with the newspapers, you need to watch what when you say you like, because they change all the time, political wise.
You're probably very wise on that front.
Definitely.
What would you say, David, is your favourite curse word and why?
Favourite what?
Curse word.
Curse word? What do you
Yeah.
mean? What's that?
When you're angry or you're in a mood, what curse word do you use the most in terms of a swear word?
I don't get angry and I don't get excited. I've dealt with huge investigations over the years, major pressures on you. I think, oh my goodness, can't believe it.
What would you?
Oh my goodness, can't believe it.
When you get time to relax, where is your favourite place or holiday destination?
Austria in the winter time, and you can't beat Scotland, the Western Isles in Scotland. I have a holiday home on one of the islands, and I like that. The only thing is the weather. And I like Spain, but I do a lot of work in Spain, and I see different aspects to Spain regarding the legal system, how it operates, the judge-led situation. But yeah, I mean, wintertime, Austria, I love Austria, respect to his film Solden, and the Western Isles in Scotland. You can't beat it. Just the weather sometimes isn't very good.
We come on to music. Who would you say is your favourite music artist? And do you have a favourite album?
The Z Cars theme tune, the old police thing was quite good, and the Sweeney theme tune was quite good. But no, I'm not a big David Bowie stuff. Over the years was probably the music icon, so to speak, in the music then, and Fleetwood Mac.
Come on to the last two. Firstly, David, what would you say is your greatest achievement to date?
The greatest achievement to date is probably staying on 34 years in the police and enjoying that, coping with our profession, challenging role. But I think the greatest achievement to date is just been me and being able to make a bit of difference over the years, and putting something back into it to do with victims, to do with families. But no single achievement, because these things, and I think I said it earlier, I always say I don't have the monopoly in ideas. I liken myself in the police, and I do now, to being a football manager. I'm only as good as my team. So to say something is a personal achievement is not always the case, because it's about the team that are round about me at that time. So I like to give credit for the people round about me, the team. So it's not just about me. So personal achievement, hard to say. Personal achievement is keeping fit and still being around today.
And finally, David Swindle, the last your take question. How do you wish to be remembered?
I wish to be remembered as someone that made a change for victims, someone that tried to help victims. And just David Swindle, an unusual name. David Swindle, the detective. I've had lots of jokes about that. Even as a young constable, someone found out my name and thought it was quite funny to write an article. Have you heard the one about David Swindle, the policeman? And then they went on to say Ian Strain, eye strain, the optician, all this stuff. So, yeah, I'm someone that's done a lot. There's a lot out there on social media about me. My name's unusual. And if I'm remembered for what I've done over the years for victims and families and for policing, great.
That, as they say, is a cut. Thank you for taking part in the Your Take interview. It's been a little bit different from my point of view, and it's been a fascinating 60 minutes to hear your own personal views about policing, the way criminals act and behave. We've covered all sorts of ground, but I think the thing that has shone through the most, which has probably been the most fascinating from my perspective, is the fact that you want to give back and help people. And the thing you've mentioned the most is we need to always think about the victims and how their lives have been damaged mentally, and I'd imagine they've lost a part of their soul and a purpose for living from what's happened to them. And I think that has been maybe the great moral of this interview, is that maybe the victims have been forgotten in some of these cases, and when they need to be heard and they need to be respected, and also they need to be helped in whatever way to deal with their losses. So thank you for giving your perspective. And where do we find out more and see you more, and maybe go to one of these live events you've mentioned?
Yeah, you can go along. Check out my website, which is www.davidswindle.com, and there's a bit on it on tour, and you'll see where they are. So you're in Bristol, I think, or wherever. Have a look at where they are, and we'll get you backstage, and you can come and see me before it. There's quite a few. We'll talk once we go off this, and I'll tell you what's the best one for you.
Oh, thank you kindly, and thanks for the last 60 minutes. And I'll let you paint that deck in. And thank you.
God, sun's out.
Thank you kindly for your time.
Okay, switch off recorder now. Thanks very much for you as well. Great.